This is Theory of Change. I'm Matthew Sheffield. Thanks for joining me. Since he became president for the second time, Donald Trump has launched the largest assault on free speech that the nation has seen since Japanese Americans were interned because of their family origins in World War II. Among many other things, Trump has signed an executive order classifying Antifa as a terrorist organization, even though there are no actual Antifa organizations. The regime has also launched an investigation against private citizen organizations like the George Soros-founded Open Society Foundation. Trump has also stolen billions of dollars from private universities like Harvard and Columbia because they dared to tolerate student protests against Israel's war crimes in Gaza. Trump has even demanded that all late night television comedians be fired for making jokes about him. And his FCC chairman's threats against broadcast television companies have led to the cancellation of the number one host, CBS's Stephen Colbert, and the suspension of ABC's Jimmy Kimmel until public outcry forced Disney to bring him back. All of these attacks against free speech, and that is only just a very short listing of what Trump has done, must be fought tooth and nail. But censorship opponents must also realize that Trump's agenda is actually the fulfillment of what far right Republicans have wanted for more than 70 years, as exemplified most prominently by the infamous Wisconsin Senator Joe McCarthy and his number one defender and proponent, William F. Buckley Jr., the founder of National Review magazine. Buckley and his allies' love of censorship should be much more widely known, especially since Trump is trying to directly enact many of the ideas that they had for America back in their time. Joining me to discuss all of this is Seth Cotlar. He is a professor of history at Willamette University in Oregon, where he teaches and writes about the American right and early American history. He's also writing a book on a white nationalist activist who became the chair of the Oregon Republican Party in the 1970s. I hope you'll enjoy. Theory of Change is part of the Flux Media Network, so go to flux.community for more podcasts and articles about politics, religion, technology, and media, and how they all intersect to create the culture. And if you like what we're doing here, you can subscribe to the show. You can go to patreon.com/discoverflux or go to flux.community, and we have free subscriptions on there as well. But if you can do a paid subscription, that would be very helpful. I don't have any big connections to fancy foundations or any billionaires giving me money on the side. So I really could use your support if you can do that. Thank you very much. And if you're watching on YouTube, please do click the like and subscribe button on this video so you can get notified whenever we post new ones. Thanks a lot for your support. All right, let's get into the program. And joining me now is Seth Cotlar. Hey, Seth, welcome to Theory of Change.
Yeah, happy to be here.
Yeah, well, so I wish we were talking under better circumstances, but the long and short of it is that the recent assault on free speech and civil liberties that Donald Trump has been conducting, it's come as a surprise to a lot of people, but for historians like yourself, this is actually the fulfillment of what the reactionary right in America has wanted since the very beginning.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, there's a long history of this on the right, not necessarily inside the Republican Party, but as the Republican Party has moved rightward, it has kind of moved closer to those voices on the right that usually, at least since World War II, justified it in terms of anti-communism. Right, was the way they understood it. Right, so they thought, that communism was an existential threat to the United States, and hence communists should not have free speech rights in the U.S. And so that's how they justified their various efforts to, the kind of McCarthyite movement in the 50s, but then continues on into the 60s and so on. And so this is why when, contemporary politicians refer to just kind of like center-left American politicians as communists, it's simultaneously kind of laughable, but it's also kind of ominous, because this is the rationale that historically was used by people on the right to justify squelching free speech.
Yeah, it really has. And I guess we could say that kind of started with the Red Scare, in the early 20th century, and they've never really gotten a different tactic since then. Especially, which is especially ironic considering that the Democratic Party, economically speaking, has moved quite a bit to the right, and only recently, maybe has had some kind of pushback from their own voters against that.
Mhm.
But like the idea of Democrats being communists is just laughably stupid, but it's effective, I think, for a lot of people.
It is. Well, and this is part of the deal with these kind of right wing sort of propagandists. The charge of communism never really had to have much legitimacy to it or heft. The John Birch Society famously regarded Dwight Eisenhower as a communist. Robert Welch claimed that Dwight Eisenhower was a communist, which at the time most people were like, "Wait, you're not serious? You're kidding, right?" And he wasn't kidding; like he really meant it. Um,
Yeah, he did.
and somehow, I mean, at the time they were an object of great ridicule, but enough people were kind of willing to plausibly believe it. And in the late 50s and early 60s, the reason why that charge sometimes stuck with some particularly kind of deranged people, often it had to do with the Little Rock Nine, and that Dwight Eisenhower sent troops to integrate the Little Rock school in 1957. And so by communism, I mean, communism is like a great floating signifier, right? And so what people meant by
Absolutely.
communism was like the integration of schools, for example, is one thing people associated with communism, um, or that Dwight Eisenhower might be, you know, slightly okay with the existence of labor unions. And so because of this, therefore, obviously he was a communist, right? Because he was willing to treat labor unions as if they have a right to exist. And so the charge of communism on the part of these right-wing activists has nothing to do with the actual understanding of they haven't read Karl Marx and they don't understand what communism is. It's just a smear that they can then link to other causes that they know maybe their audience isn't happy about, doesn't agree with. Another common charge is that the LGBTQ movement is part of a communist effort to demoralize and undermine the morality of Americans, right? And so communism just becomes this kind of catch-all term that you use to explain why this particular group or this particular movement is not just other Americans who are maybe different from you, but rather they are other Americans who are your existential enemy who must be silenced and crushed in order to save America.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And Trump, I mean, he's made that viewpoint very explicit. In the elite circles of the Republican Party, these types of expressions, they tended, and you've done a lot of research on your own uh, scholarship about how the Republican Party in Oregon and elsewhere had kind of they relied on these reactionaries for votes and for money, but they always tried to keep them from having power and from the public knowing fully who they were. It was like they were the crazy wealthy aunt in the attic, who owned all the house, but they didn't ever want to let her out. And that's kind of the model that they followed for a long time, I think.
Yeah, no, for sure. And there was a real, so it's been interesting to see people like Tucker Carlson and Ted Cruz and Karl Rove speak out against what happened with Jimmy Kimmel. And I don't know how much credence to give this. I don't know how much in good faith they're actually making these arguments. But, they are saying what is the right thing to say, which is that the FCC putting pressure on uh, private companies to fire people because of their speech is it's like the low-hanging fruit of civics 101, right, that every educated American should know. And so Princeton educated Ted Cruz, and I don't know where Tucker Carlson went to college, but these are not unintelligent people. They're aware of
Somewhere expensive.
so yeah, and they're now saying the right thing. Who knows why they're saying it or what the impact of it will be? but this is where having someone who is the head of your party, who either doesn't know or just doesn't care, right? That like as the president, you don't issue a statement telling NBC who they're supposed to hire and fire for their late night shows. I don't believe, according to the tenets of originalism, that was in Article 2. That the president gets to decide who those late night shows. It's so just facially ludicrous and authoritarian. But the GOP used to be dominated by people who would immediately clock that and call it out and say, no, this is not the role of the president to do this. But now the party is comprised of a large number of people who are perfectly fine with the president doing this, apparently. And then a couple people who are willing to stick their neck out and say this is bad, but who obviously are not going to do anything about it, right? And let alone criticize the president and the head of their party for doing it. So it's the political culture of the party is in a really bad kind of authoritarian place. And my worry is that, if we congratulate Ted Cruz too much right now for saying the right things, I can imagine a future a few months down the road where Ted Cruz is like, well, this isn't good, but these people are communists, and so free speech is a difficult issue, and so we need to, in hard times, we need to rethink our principles. I hope he doesn't do that, but as the past track record of Republican politicians over the last 10 years should not give us great hope that they're actually going to stand up for principle.
Yeah, no, it should not. But the other thing also in the right-wing reactions to Jimmy Kimmel getting suspended indefinitely by ABC, it's also been kind of fascinating in that I think a lot of them do not distinguish between private actors criticizing somebody and a government official with force of law power criticizing someone and ordering someone to be fired. They don't seem to like they make no distinction. So like often I'll see them say, "Oh well, you guys got Gina Carano, the actor fired from Star Wars," and it was like, well, actually, those were private citizens expressing their opinions,
right.
And the government had nothing to do with her being fired.
Right.
But they genuinely seem to place no distinction between private media actors or private citizens and the Democratic Party. And this is also why, for instance, they impute any violence done at a left-wing protest that's actually the Democratic Party. The highest people in the party are responsible for that violence, even if they condemn it and don't support it.
Right.
It's really astonishing. And it's not, I don't think it's an act, though, which is weird. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, no, and right. It's the distinction between civil society actors. There's a long history of boycotts in the U.S., right? I'm teaching a course on the American Revolution right now. That was basically how the mobilization for the American Revolution worked, is that they organized boycotts. They ostracized people who broke the boycotts. If you were caught drinking tea, your neighbors would kind of tut-tut at you and tell you shouldn't do it. And sometimes if you refused, it could get a little ugly. Right. So, the history of civil society functioning in such a way as to kind of persuade / encourage people to alter their behavior in the name of contributing to a kind of broader project is hundreds and hundreds of years old. It's like the most common thing in the world. And yes, that is a very different thing than someone with political power who has the ability to revoke an FCC license for a multi-billion-dollar company, telling that company what they should do, right? Those are completely different things. The other thing that I will point out is that, back in, I think, 2018, 2019, McKay Coppins wrote this great article for The Atlantic that was all about this coordinated network of cancellation organized by Donald Trump Jr. and coordinated with Breitbart and eventually Libs of TikTok, I think, was involved with this, where they collect all of this data on journalists and other activists who they don't like in preparation for the time when they might have to cancel them. So the idea that this is such a terrible thing is this is exactly their modus operandi, right? This is what they do in terms of their approach towards trying to use intimidation, et cetera. And oftentimes the information that they select is sometimes wrong, sometimes very like decontextualized, et cetera. But the idea that like they're opposed to the cancellation of private citizens for what they say is just ludicrous. I mean, that's basically, so that is one of the main things that they do in as part of their, I mean, that's what they're doing now with like people who said things they don't like about Charlie Kirk online. They're collecting, names of people and trying to get them fired. So, to me,
and also government officials saying that as well. J.D. Vance
right.
telling people call
Right.
and inform on your coworkers and your friends and family if they criticize Saint Charlie the Beloved.
Right. Yeah. And there is a difference between the president's son coordinating these networks with the owners of some of the largest, right-wing media outlets in order to coordinate their messaging, in order to target people. That's a little bit different than like just some citizens on Blue Sky being like, man, I don't like Disney. I'm going to cancel my Disney subscription because I don't like that they made this decision. Yeah. And so right. So the dynamics of power at play here, both economic power, but more importantly, political power, when the president does it or the vice president does it or the FCC chair does it. Completely different things.
Yeah. And, and then going back further in the history, I think a lot of people who are educated today have this false concept of William F. Buckley, the founder of National Review, that oftentimes people say, gosh, I wish the Republican Party was like it was when Buckley was alive. And it's like, you guys have not paid attention to his actual life and the things that he did. I mean, his first book, God and Man at Yale, is literally him saying, Yale, you've got to stop these commie and Jewish and atheist professors who like racial integration and rights for women and say the Bible's not true. You got to fire them because we can't have this. This is wrong. Mm-hmm. That's the whole point of his first book. And then his second book was literally a defense of Joe McCarthy, called Joe McCarthy and his Enemies. That basically, it was effectively well, you don't have to like McCarthy, but gosh, he's sure going after the right people. And this is literally the same arguments that are being made now by many of these sort of quisling Republicans for Donald Trump. They claim not to like him, but they also seem to think that even though Donald Trump is actively attacking the free press and trying to revoke licenses and censor teachers and history and revoke science budgets, that even though he's doing all these horrible illegal things, he's still somehow not as bad as some grad students who have purple hair. That's seems to be what they think.
Yeah. I mean, it's on Buckley. I mean, one of the things that I learned that was kind of shocking to me is when he was writing God and Man at Yale, there was a woman named Lucille Carden Crane who was running this organization called Educational Information Incorporated that was basically looking through textbooks that were being used in school and identifying them as secret communist Trojan horses. These were like incredibly pablum, social studies textbooks, but she had sussed out that these were actually secret communists who were trying to brainwash children into communism, by which, and oftentimes the sign that these were communists had to do with the fact that they were pro-racial equality, was one of the tip-offs for her. And the person who funded her work was none other than Bill Buckley Sr., William F. Buckley's father. And so he was the guy bankrolling this entire project, which was actually it's kind of the Moms for Liberty 1.0 kind of. And it led to this kind of movement of women often sort of working in local school boards to intimidate local superintendents, school superintendents, and other teachers to drop certain textbooks that they considered to be communistic. And this was especially potent in the South, as kind of white Southern women tried to thwart this kind of imposition of a certain idea of America as a multiracial democracy that was, becoming kind of the norm amongst social scientists and other kind of public figures in the post-World War II era, for understandable reasons, given what we just fought the war about. And so fighting off those efforts to kind of teach American history in such a way that sort of treated white people and Black people and Native American people as equally human was a really important strategy for those sort of grassroots women activists, but it was also part of a broader kind of national network funded by people like William F. Buckley Sr. That provided those women the kind of ammunition to go into their school boards and explain to them why these books had to be taken out of the library, why they needed to be removed from the curriculum, et cetera.
Yeah, and the other thing also about William F. Buckley Sr. is that he also, for seemingly the entire latter part of his life, funded a local newspaper in South Carolina that was in support of segregation very militantly. So, and that obviously filtered into his son's views. And if I remember right, I think the father said that his son was 100% in support of segregation. And in subsequent decades after that passed through, the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and some of the other cases got rid of segregation, formalized. Buckley later said that, well, okay, yes, I think that those were good ideas. But then he still there was a vestige of his former attitudes in that he opposed any sort of attempt to put embargoes or pressure on South Africa. National Review was, till the very end, a very strong supporter of the South African segregation regime.
Right.
And it's an important part of the magazine's history that I think should be more widely known.
For sure. And the Sam Tannenhouse biography that just came out is really great on all of this. And sort of, he's the one that I think has discovered this tie to this South Carolina segregation.
Yeah, he did. Yeah.
Which was an amazing sort of research find on his part. And it does really bring out elements of, Buckley was one of these figures who was able to kind of just straddle that kind of line between the kind of liberal conservatism and illiberal conservatism.
Conservative and reactionary, as I call it.
Right. That's another way to think of it, so that he could be kind of in dialogue with and friends with people who were on that other side of the line, people who were comfortable with actual government censorship, while he himself could sort of maintain a sort of plausible, position as well, I'm not calling for that. So, or his relationship to segregation, he wrote Why the South Must Prevail in 1957, defending segregation. But he defends it in this kind of wiggly sort of way. And then where he says well, it's just that for now, whites are the advanced race, so he's claiming that he didn't believe in fundamental permanent racial inequality. It's just that for now,
he wanted to protect Black people from themselves, basically.
Right. That's his argument. And then he later makes this kind of specious claim that he'd be in favor of disenfranchising poor, uneducated white people too, which he knew was never going to happen. But that is the way he justified his support for kind of disenfranchisement of Black people, by claiming it wasn't about race. It's about education for him. Anyway, I mean, to me, part of what comes out in that Tannenhouse biography, and I think is important for our current understanding of why people are willing to consider these acts that are going to infringe upon free speech, is that the conspiracy theories at the heart of them are really important, right, for understanding what makes these tick. So Buckley's father was a gut bucket anti-Semite, right? And it's important for us to recognize that anti-Semitism in the 1930s, 40s, and 50s didn't mean that one was just personally rude to Jewish people. It's a totalizing theory about how the world works, and this idea that Jews are communists, the Jews are behind the communist conspiracy. And the way that Jews further that communist conspiracy is through their control of higher education, and they brainwash children that way, through their control of the media, they brainwash children that way, and through their control of Hollywood and entertainment, which is another way in which they brainwash people. So the theory goes that, and all of this is just empirically baseless and ludicrous, but it taps into that kind of anti-Semitism. And also Jews were behind the civil rights movement as well. That was the kind of last piece of this. And so you can explain to people why it is that we need to maybe squelch some of these media outlets or some of these professors and so on, because they're not really like us. They hate us. They're out to destroy us. And therefore, this is just purely defensive when we silence these voices. And so the conspiracy theory that gets people to kind of look upon a pretty like just normal looking, education professor at the University of Oregon, who's like a New Deal FDR Democrat, and say, oh no, that person actually is part of this shadowy secret conspiracy that seeks to destroy Christianity and seeks to destroy freedom and seeks to destroy America. And that Buckley, very much participated in, but also tried to distance himself a bit from, like when he criticized Robert Welch of the Birchers, right?
But never the Birchers themselves.
But never the Birchers themselves. Very fine people.
Only
They're all very fine people. It's just Robert Welch who's the problem, right? And so this is where he allowed that conspiracy obsessed dimension of the American right, which is, to my mind, a very defining feature of the reactionary version of conservatism.
Sure.
He allowed that to flourish.
Yeah. Well, and he was, in many ways, I think one could say, so the term that I use to describe people like Buckley is a fictitious Republican. That they're somebody who, who knows how to use a salad fork, who is a well-dressed white person. And so therefore, if they're, what they're saying can't all be bad. And so we have to be in dialogue with these people because look at them. Look, they know how to dress well. And, and we see that recently with Ezra Klein did an interview with Ben Shapiro. I mean, Ben Shapiro has literally gone on a neo-Nazi podcast and bashed Jews. Ben Shapiro has done this. Yes.
Oh my gosh.
I'll actually play the audio for the listeners. Let me. I'll pull it up here.
The host. What was the podcast?
It was the Red Ice show.
Whoa.
With Lana Lochtov.
Oh my gosh, he went on that.
He went on that. Yes. And he bashed Jews in Hollywood and said that they were conducting a war on Christianity.
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. That the title of it is just straight up. I mean, I've got a million things in my archive that are just that title from, the White Aryan Resistance newsletter or William Luther Pierce.
There are a lot of Jews in Hollywood who feel they have a perverse leftist view of history pushed by the Soviet Union, that what really destroyed Europe was Christianity. It was not fascism. It was not communism. It was not leftism. It was Christianity. And therefore the cure to intolerance is to bash the hell out of Christianity. And so there's a war. There certainly is a war on Christianity. It's coming from some people who are secular Jews. It's coming from a lot of leftists. But yeah, I mean there's no question that evangelical Christians support Israel at a much higher clip and much more substantially than most Jews in America do, because most Jews in America don't care about Judaism. I mean, everybody who's bad is by nature a member of the white patriarchy, and everybody who's good is by nature a member of a minority group. This is why you have the stock character who is the wise black friend, right? It's never the wise white friend. It's always the wise female friend or the wise gay friend or the wise black friend, because the impression is that the only wise people in our society are members of minorities, which is not to say, of course, that there are not wise black people. There are plenty of them, right? I mean, Thomas Sowell is a very wise black man.
That's great.
But the idea that, you know, every person on television who is wise must be of minority persuasion is really a very subtle war on kind of the white males in our society, which of course white males can take, but it does pervert, you know, the American mind as far as how we view certain segments of the population.
Conservatives are always racist, sexist, homophobic. Right now they're pushing this anti-nuclear family, anti-white, anti-Christian. So what is it that they want here?
Well, I mean, what they want is they want to destroy kind of the foundations of American society, and there's no question that this is what they want. I mean, this has been the case for the left since the 1960s, and they're just part of the broader left culture, which suggests that American culture is deeply evil, that the bourgeois are deeply evil.
That's a sentiment I've read many times over the course of doing my research, and every time I've seen it in the past, that's usually been said by a neo-Nazi type.
Not by a Jewish person.
No, not by a Jewish person. But anyway, I mean, wow, that is truly truly shocking that someone. It's really complicated, the relationship between Orthodox Jews and evangelical Christians around Israel as an issue. You know, I think most Orthodox Jews have a very strategic idea about this alliance and don't really care about the theological reasons why evangelicals might be pro-Israel, which usually involves a kind of vision of the end times in which Jews go to hell. But you know, if you
are burned alive, actually.
Right. Oh, nice. Yeah. Lovely. So yeah, but you know, if you don't believe that, if you don't share that belief, then, you know, what do you care what reasons people have, right, for supporting your political interests? So that alliance is a really opportunistic and sort of strategic one, but it involves not taking the Christian nationalism of some of these evangelical Christians seriously, and not understanding that for a lot of folks, what they like about Israel is that it is a religiously exclusionary state. And so therefore they imagine that America could be like that. And the people that they would want to exclude from their ideal America would be people like me and Ben Shapiro. And so Ben Shapiro apparently doesn't take that seriously as a potential future or potential threat. But if he knew much about American history, he would know that that's probably not some energies you want to be like just kind of toying with and playing with in the name of just advancing a very particular foreign policy goal that you might have.
Yeah, no, you wouldn't. And I think that attitude also certainly does extend to Donald Trump as well, because, you know, there's that phrase that a lot of Republicans now have as a platitude regarding him. They say, well, you need to take him seriously, but not literally. And it's like, well, you know, his crackdowns on free speech and his, you know, going after licenses and demanding people be fired, demanding people pay him money in order to get approval for certain things. You know, when he says it should be illegal for you to do something, he actually does mean that. And I think that a lot of these conservatives, they have this concocted version of Donald Trump in their head, who doesn't take anything seriously, and it's true that Donald Trump, you know, isn't smart enough to have an ideology, but nonetheless, you know, he has a personal totalitarianism and peevishness about him. It's, you know, it is a totalitarianism born of pettiness, but it is nonetheless a totalitarianism.
It is. And I think their reasons for poo-pooing it is because they take for granted the existence of liberal institutions that they themselves are also working to undermine, but which they just take for granted. So yes, Donald Trump doesn't currently have the power to wave a wand and get people fired yet, right? And in part, he doesn't because all these things have to then go through the courts, and then the courts will, you know, make a ruling. And
certainly trying to do that in the Federal Reserve.
Well, right. So he pushes all of this stuff, and then there are these various guardrails in our system that are still, to some extent, limiting what he can do. And so the audience of people who want you to think that, like, oh, the people warning about Donald Trump, they just have Trump derangement syndrome, right? Like, they don't know what they're talking about. And to the extent that they are right, that Trump hasn't successfully done all of these authoritarian things that he wants to do, to the extent that hasn't happened, it's not because of anything about him. It's because of something about these institutions that the people saying, oh, don't worry about Donald Trump, they themselves don't care about those institutions. They themselves are undermining those institutions. And so once those institutions are gone, so this is why, like, for example, I don't trust Tucker Carlson when he talks about this stuff. Like, he's been participating in the undermining of our judicial system and the legitimacy of the judiciary of anyone who doesn't rule in the favor of Donald Trump, right? So, like, the idea that somehow he is contributing to the situation in which it may become possible that there are no guardrails stopping a president from just squelching the free speech of individuals. And yeah, so that to me is the part that is really frightening, is how those guardrails that most people who don't study politics for a living or don't study history for a living, like, there's no necessary reason why they should know how our judicial system works, right? Or how the Supreme Court rules.
Yeah, it's not relevant to their lives at all.
Right. They're busy. They've got other things to do, right? And so this is where, the fact that, like, just about everybody who studies this for a living is raising major, warning flags about what's happening. And that's why they're trying to undermine the universities, trying to undermine, academics, because these are people who actually know stuff. This is why they're trying to undermine, people like Tony Fauci or other, sort of scientific experts around vaccines or other things, is that they want to impose their particular vision of the world through their use of federal power. And anyone or anything, journalists, academics who sort of stand in the way, are their targets. And it's just right out of the authoritarian textbook. And the battle is for the minds of ordinary American citizens, and whether or not, like, what will they accept, right? Like, what will they be willing to accept? And what they learned through January 6th is that 77 million Americans are willing to accept watching a coup happen on their television screens in their own US Capitol, and then they will accept the idea that this was okay, and that the people who did it should be pardoned, and that it was simultaneously an inside job by the FBI and also a day of love by patriots. And so if they can get 77 million people to, like, be okay with that, right? Or to get a whole bunch of people to accept the idea that COVID vaccines killed more people than they saved. If they can get that out there, what else can they tell us? What else can they tell the American people that they'll just accept? Like, that this journalist wasn't actually a journalist, but was really a domestic terrorist. And so this is why this journalist has to be locked up, not because they were, taking footage that was embarrassing to the government, rather because they were there as part of a domestic terrorist organization. So,
yeah. Well, and that's what the designation of Antifa, quote unquote, as a terrorist organization is about. Because, of course, as you certainly know, there is no national organization of Antifa, and legally speaking, there is no local organization of it. These are anarchists. They have no organization by definition. They have no leaders. They hate the Democratic Party. They are not funded by the donors of the Democratic Party because they despise the donors of the Democratic Party. And to the extent that anybody ever helps them from a legal basis, it's just purely, a support for individual civil rights. And so MAGA will be, this is another, hopefully the best case scenario that this is, Jeffrey Epstein or QAnon, as a sequel of that conspiracy theory that, they allege there's this giant, secret cabal that's all running everything and doing all these nefarious things. And then when they actually have the power to investigate it,
like they were very convinced that Patriot Front, which is a white nationalist group that holds marches across the country, they've been convinced since its beginning that it's an FBI front. Well, that means then that Kash Patel is running Patriot Front. Then is that really what you believe, guys? But like it doesn't have to make sense because it's all about identity rather than about logic.
Right. So in terms of this designation of Antifa as a domestic terrorist organization, I have a very Portland specific angle on this. So in 2019, in the summer of 2019, you probably remember this, there was a march, a far right march organized in Portland. And it was led by two guys named Joe Biggs and Enrique Terrio, who at the time were just kind of known as like, oh, maybe Proud Boy adjacent, kind of right-wing grifter types. Both of them then were eventually convicted for their actions on January 6th and were kind of important organizers of January 6th. But obviously we didn't know that in the summer of 2019. So these two future January 6ers organized this march in Portland. And there's video of some of our local Portland kind of far-right activists involved with a group called Patriot Prayer, who were recording themselves live on Facebook Live, saying to all of the kind of rank and file people who are going to go and join this far-right march, take video of what's happening and be sure that you tweet it at Ted Cruz and at Donald Trump and tell them that they need to declare Antifa a domestic terrorist organization. So this is 2019, right? And I don't know how they had identified Ted Cruz as, I mean, Donald Trump makes sense, but I don't know why Ted Cruz. But so this was the message that they sent out to their followers, was their goal in this action that they were taking on the streets of Portland was to record images of violence, send them to Ted Cruz so that he can then pass a bill that would declare their local enemies in Portland to be domestic terrorists so that they could then be locked up. And so this has been part of this kind of far right activist community's agenda for quite a long time. And so, yeah. And at the time in 2019, it didn't go anywhere, and the president didn't. I mean, there was talk about it, but it didn't actually kind of result in a bill, as far as I know. But this is just like, much like with many things in Trump 2.0, it's a kind of continuation and an intensification of something that was already kind of in place in Trump 1.0. But there were also at the time, there were guardrails. There were probably people in Trump's administration or in the Senate who were like, you can't just declare some vague entity domestic terrorists and go after them. Like, that's obviously not constitutional. But anybody who would have said that is now pretty much gone, right, from the Trump administration.
Yes, they are. Well, and so it is, this reactionary takeover of the Republican Party and the cancellation of conservatives and moderates from within the party. This has of course been a long running trend that really did begin with Buckley and the Goldwater takeover. But of course he failed so badly that they were set back with that. But just going back to Ezra Klein and his, friendly chit chat with Ben Shapiro, and he went to has a conference called Abundance where he had it sponsored by Mark Andreessen, a guy who hates democracy and has said as much. And Peter Thiel funded that conference, if I remember right. And so like a bunch of these right-wing oligarch billionaires are funding Ezra Klein's endeavors now. And it's hard to say what's in his mind or in his heart, whether he actually agrees with these people or not, or if it's just some pathological desire to, we share America. I mean, that's what he says publicly. He says, well, we share this country with these people, and so we have to reach out to them. And this is the wrong way to understand outreach, because the individual Republican voter, a lot of them are tremendously ignorant of what the party wants, and they don't actually know. And anyone can see that if you talk to a regular Republican voter. They don't
know what Donald Trump stands for most of the time. But the elites absolutely do, and they want him to be even worse. So the idea that you would engage with them is just ludicrously backwards. But it seems kind of, common within a lot of the mainstream media. Like, you see CNN hiring that Scott Jennings guy and some of these other people who just constantly lie. Like, Scott Jennings has nothing substantive to say about anything ever. And he doesn't give you his own thoughts. He gives you what the talking points of the party are. So he adds nothing. Like, engaging with these people who are the elites gets you nowhere. And in fact, these Jennings types or Shapiro, they're hated by the far right. You're not actually de-radicalizing anyone by pretending that Shapiro is smart or that Scott Jennings is honest. You accomplish nothing by doing this.
Yeah, no, I mean, yeah, I think you're right. I mean, it's such a hard situation because, like, theoretically, yes, indeed, like in a democratic society, our job is to engage agonistically with people with whom we disagree. Like, that is what a healthy democratic society looks like. On the other hand, when you have a party that is basically kicked out of its coalition, anyone who actually is a legitimate intellectual, I mean, so then who do you engage with? So what, Curtis Yarvin? You're supposed to like sit down and have an argument with Curtis Yarvin, who like doesn't know anything about anything. Like, I've read some of his stuff. It is so just
Laughable.
like, if this dude was actually in conversation with people who knew things, maybe he would like have something to contribute and have some insight. But like, he's just replicating the oldest, dumbest, like right-wing memes that I've seen a million times in this stuff from the 50s and 60s from the newspaper edited by this like know nothing chair of the Oregon Republican Party I'm writing a book about, right? Like, so if you're Ezra Klein, like, and you want to have a conversation with like a thoughtful, engaged, knowledgeable, like right winger, who is it, right? Like, because they've kicked out of the party everyone who is like that over the last 10 years, right? So that creates just a structural problem, which is a problem that is a function of the dysfunction of the institution that is the Republican Party. But then there's the problem of our media ecosystem, right? Which is that if you want to reach just ordinary, Republican voters, who I agree with you are not, if you were to share with them Project 2025, most of them would be like, wait, what? They would either read it and be able to suss immediately, this is incoherent nonsense, this makes no sense, or they would find it repulsive, right? But they don't know, none of the media that they're imbibing as part of this Republican culture is telling them this. And so, but they've been so kind of ensconced into this media world where they've been taught by Donald Trump not to trust anything that NPR or PBS or NBC or any of these companies tell them, any other media outlet, the New York Times, et cetera. It just becomes an incredibly like challenging communications problem for the Democrats or for anyone on the left, where huge swaths of our fellow citizens have been pre-inoculated against believing anything we would say. And somehow anything that they see in a reel from Tucker Carlson or whoever, they're willing to believe, right? Or Scott Jennings. They'll just instinctively believe what he has to say, even though he's lying most of the time. And so this is where I don't know. If you believe in democracy, as I do, right, you should believe in a culture of like open and free expression in which people with different perspectives kind of talk with each other, right, and hash it out. On the other hand, what do you do when part of the folks who are part of your democratic culture don't believe in a culture of open expression and want to destroy it in the name of, creating a world in which their voices are the only ones that get amplified or have any reach? And it's, wish I had an answer for it, but.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it certainly is tricky. I mean, I would say, as somebody who came out of that world of right-wing media and activism and intellectualism before it was purged by Trumpism, I would say that having debates with those who are in it still really is not productive. But on the other hand, actually quoting their arguments at length
and debunking them in a comprehensive fashion.
Mhm.
I think that's how you engage with these people,
Mhm.
because when they're on the air and having to defend themselves, they just lie all
Right.
the time. Like they say, "Oh, I don't believe that. Oh, I didn't say
Right.
that." Well, no, you did, and we have it on tape right here.
Yes.
And like and like with the thing with Shapiro, like here he went on a neo-Nazi podcast. Like
Right.
he has never been challenged in the mainstream media for going on a podcast that argues for white nationalism and anti-Semitism. And in fact, the
He signs
podcast
Matt
episode that
Walsh's paychecks, doesn't he? I mean, like,
Uh, yeah, or something. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, it's a,
he's the
and yet
guy-
they're never they're not asked about these things. But even if they were, they would just lie. So you
Yes.
got to look at their arguments and dissect them. I think that's the answer. And when you do, it reveals just how shallow, how uninformed,
Right.
how self-serving these arguments and these individuals are.
Right.
And you did a Twitter thread a number of years ago about a book that I think that still lingers with me. I loved your dissection of it,
Mhm.
Seth, which the book "Vindicating the Founders."
Oh God.
If you, yeah, by Thomas West. And what's so revealing about it though is that like right wing intellectualism doesn't really exist. It's an oxymoron basically,
Mhm. Mhm.
and so they can't succeed. Like the horrible irony, which they never get called on, is they have failed in the marketplace of ideas, their history, their science, their governance, everything that they have argued that they try to do whenever they come into power, they fail. So like Oklahoma is run by the most MAGA Republican Secretary of Education. They're also the 50th in educational attainment. And instead of doing something about it, somebody just introduced a bill in Oklahoma to require every higher institution of learning in Oklahoma to have a shrine to Charlie Kirk. And that's what they're spending their time on, and apparently watching porn in their meetings.
Yeah.
This
So
is what
apparently that didn't happen, or it was, I don't know. I've read some stuff that suggested it has a kind of innocent explanation. Not that I
Oh,
want
I
to
know.
be
Yeah.
that guy, but like I don't think
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um,
Yeah.
right.
But just going back to Thomas. So like, Thomas West, though, like essentially, this is why they have such a militant hatred of affirmative action policies, which in fact are not always about race. In fact, there's lots of disadvantaged white people who benefit from affirmative action and DEI programs, but they don't know that. And so they hate these programs of inclusion, though, because they want quotas for themselves. That's what they want. And when and they're the things they make, like Thomas West, like, this is my very long-winded way of asking you to tell us the story of his book, Vindicating the Founders.
Oh man. So Thomas West he's a Plato scholar. I know nothing about Plato, so he may be perfectly adept and good as a scholar of Plato. Can't assess the quality of that work, but he did write a book that's all about, and it was published in the late '90s, and I was asked to review it in the late 1990s when I was finishing up my PhD, and I read the first 30 pages of it, and I wrote back to the journal and I said, I don't think this is a book that's even worth reviewing. Like, there's just nothing there. This is just we didn't have the word troll at the time, but had we had the word troll, I would have said, like, this is just a book trolling the entire historical profession by someone who clearly has no idea what they're talking about. So like, this isn't even worth taking seriously enough to review. And so I ended up not reviewing it, but I did read it. And then in the age of Trump, suddenly Thomas West became this like oracle for Hillsdale College, and as this great far-seeing man who has been trying to tell the truth about American history, and just no one's been listening to him. And I was like, wait, Thomas West, that name's familiar. And then I looked it up. I was like, oh my God, it's that guy? Holy cow. And so in this book, I mean, it just, even at the front step, he refers to, and I can't remember which historian it is, but some very like mainstream conservative historian as a radical leftist. And it was the kind of thing where it would be like someone calling Joe Manchin a radical leftist, right? Where like, when you read it, you just think, okay, this person just has no idea like what they're talking about. And they completely misrepresent every historian and their interpretation that they talk about. And there's also this very strange moment in the chapter on slavery where it seems to be suggesting that the founders were white nationalists, but not in a derogatory way, right? So he seems to be saying that, like,
In a
well,
good way.
hey, I'm not saying this is good, but like this is what they believed in. They had a right to believe that, but also they hated slavery. So don't you dare accuse them of being racist. But also they probably thought America was only for white people, but they weren't racist. And so it's this really kind of incoherent. I mean, it all starts just from the premise that anything a white founder did in the 18th century must have been good. And anybody who would criticize them for anything obviously hates them and hates America, right? And can't be trusted to teach our children. And so in an entire world in which historians were trying to bring, and successfully did bring, a ton of nuance to how we understood the thinking of the founding generation and these white founders, in ways that didn't just, oh, they were all racist, therefore America is a racist country. Like that's his presumption of what people were saying. But that's his misreading. It was far more nuanced and complicated what folks were doing. So it was just propaganda, right? It was just a guy using the duress of the fact that he had a PhD and taught at a university. I could write a book about Plato and show how Plato teaches us that like Donald Trump is the worst person in the world and it's our obligation to like impeach him. I could probably string together some quotes from Plato that would like make that argument, but that doesn't make me a Plato scholar. That just makes me a propagandist, right? A cynical propagandist. And that's basically what this guy did with his book. But, and he is the person who trained at least one, and I think a few more of the professors who now teach at Hillsdale. And Hillsdale College is basically the Harvard of the Trump administration now. They're the ones who are running one of the groups running the celebration of the 250th anniversary, producing a ton of content for that effort. PragerU is another organization that, again, like if you know anything about the history and you watch PragerU content, it's so obviously misrepresenting and sometimes just outright making stuff up. And strangely enough, always on one side of the political aisle, weirdly. It always serves only one side when they get things wrong. But this organization is now basically driving the way the federal government is encouraging people across the country. And so they're abusing the trust that citizens should rightly put in their federal government, right, to not lie to them. They are abusing that trust with an assist from the Trump administration. So they are. I mean, national memory is a complicated thing. It's not like during the bicentennial, all of the content that was produced for the bicentennial was, rigorous and historically accurate and wasn't saturated with propaganda and so on. It's right. So it's not as if we're measuring it against some like perfect ideal that has existed in the past, but it's just egregiously bad the way they're approaching this now, and egregiously partisan, which was not the case in 1776 with the bicentennial. They were pretty scrupulously bipartisan or nonpartisan in the way that they approached telling the history of the country back then.
Which, I mean, you would think that that's the basic standard, but you had a post recently where you noted how that one of the PragerU has a whole series that the White House is putting out for them, using absolutely bizarre, freaky AI-generated videos, one of which basically portrays John Adams as some sort of a predecessor to Ben Shapiro, actually. I mean, these videos, you've got to see them. So I'll roll the clip. here for the audience for that.
I am John Adams, blunt, stubborn, and the indispensable voice for independence in the Continental Congress. They called me obnoxious and disliked. I call it telling the truth. Facts are stubborn things, and whatever may be our wishes or inclinations, they cannot alter the state of facts. In other words, friend, facts do not care about our feelings. While Jefferson penned the Declaration, I drove the debate, won the votes, and dared to speak when others hesitated. I stood on principle, even when it cost me popularity.
And yeah, so I mean, this is just bizarre stuff.
Mhm.
And like this is, and was why I said earlier that they cannot succeed in the marketplace of ideas. Their scholarship is trash. It's childish, amateurish stuff that even many high school students would realize is bad historiography.
Oh, for sure. And I mean, I've showed several of these videos in my classes for students, and asked them to kind of analyze them and talk about them. And yeah, it's not right. This is where I think this is connected to their fantasy that like high school teachers and college professors are brainwashing students. And I think they have, which is false. Anyone who's ever taught knows that it doesn't work that way. And actually anyone who's ever been a student knows that it doesn't work that way. But I think they have this weird sense of like, well, because this is what leftists have been doing successfully, brainwashing people, if we just put out this content, we can get kids to love the founders with these incredibly boring and crappy AI videos. And I don't think it's going to work that way. Like, I don't think that is. So it's simultaneously like embarrassing and horrible. And I don't like it. And I don't think our government should be doing it. But I'm also not sure we need to be that worried about it because they are so bad. Right. And it's not good propaganda. It's really boring and ineffectual propaganda. But it's, I think they're interesting to analyze in terms of what they are trying to accomplish with it. And my analysis of the entire project is that basically they've selected all the people who signed the Declaration of Independence and created a little biographical AI generated video of them. Most of these people are no one that anyone's ever heard of before. There are 50 some people who signed the Declaration of Independence. Some are famous, most are not. And for good reason. Most of them led kind of like, I don't know, not particularly exciting lives.
They signed the Declaration. That's it.
Right. Which is something, that's an important historical event and, worth remembering. But there's a reason why, most people don't recognize most of the names on there. But I think the goal is to encourage kind of ordinary rank and file Republicans to identify with the American Revolution in a positive way, in the sense of like the violent part of the American Revolution, right? And the sense and the part that involved alienating their affections from what had previously been the kind of ruling authority under which folks had lived, right? So the brave thing to do, much like Kevin Roberts, the head of the Heritage Foundation, said, we're in American Revolution 2.0. That's what Trump is. And it will be bloodless as long as the left will allow it, right? Those are his words. And there's a lot of talk about invoking the American Revolution as seeing Trump as the continuation of it. The 3% militia stuff is kind of bound up with this. And so, in other words, it's encouraging people to kind of gird their loins, put on the armor of God, as J.D. Vance said the other day, right? And be prepared to what? What followed after the Declaration of Independence, right? Like what are they asking people to prepare themselves for and sacrifice themselves for? And they would never explicitly own this, right, as what their project is. but it's basically encouraging people to identify with ordinary, regular people who decided that at that historical moment they had no other choice but to prepare themselves to fight, right, for the thing that they loved and which they were up against. And in this case, they're trying to frame the left as the British, right, and to frame themselves as the patriots. And it's so ironic, given that they're the ones who are sending military troops to occupy American cities. The left's not doing that. Last I checked. If you run through the list of grievances in the Declaration of Independence, Donald Trump's ticked off a whole bunch of them at this point.
Yes.
But anyway, they're supposed to, right? Republicans are supposed to think of themselves as the patriots in this scenario, and the left is supposed to, even though the Republicans control the entirety of the federal government, it's apparently the left that is actually in control of everything and who are about to destroy you and squelch you. And so you really have no other obligation but to fight back. I think that's the kind of implicit message.
I think it is. Yeah. And, this is a deeply anti-American message. Like, these people actually hate America as it is, and they have this imaginary version in their heads, in which, they claim to like the founding generation, but they also like the Confederacy. Donald Trump is very big on restoring the Confederate, military bases and putting back Confederate memorials, even though they were literal traitors to America. Literal traitors, many of whom, some of whom were actually killed for their treachery.
Right.
And so this is, this is something that I think the broader left has to take more seriously, that they really actually do want violence. They have wanted it, as you've seen in your own research on these radicals for decades. This is their fantasy. They, many of these reactionaries have fantasized about killing their fellow Americans for over 100 years.
Unfortunately, that has been a thread in American history. I mean, another piece of it that I really want to also name is the attack on empathy, right, and the ability to empathize. So, like, for example, their sympathy for the Confederacy is part of the kind of what historian David Blight called the romance of reunion, right, where the Civil War gets turned into just a battle between brothers, a tragic battle between brothers, and as a battle between white people. And where white people have to come together and forgive each other, right, and say nice things about Robert E. Lee, that he was such a, and you put the nation back together at the expense of doing what was necessary to provide equal rights and opportunities for formerly enslaved people, right? So they get erased out of the picture. So the real people to sympathize with are the poor slaveholders, right, not formerly enslaved people. With the revolution, it's really notable that there are very few Black people who figure in these PragerU videos. There's, I think, 2. And to the extent to which slavery is mentioned, it's usually mentioned in the form of the good white people who freed slaves, which is usually technically true, but the actual reality of how that happened was far more complicated. But there are so many stories that they could tell from the Revolutionary era about enslaved Black people fighting for their rights, fighting for their freedom, and successfully gaining it during the Revolutionary era. That you would think, if these people actually wanted to present a form of America in which racism is not permanently embedded in the system, but is actually something that white and Black people have worked together to kind of undo. You could tell the story of Ona Judge, who was an enslaved woman who got her freedom when she ran away from George Washington. You could tell the story of Prince Whipple, whose owner, William Whipple, is one of the people whose stories is told by Prager, but they don't tell the story of Prince Whipple, who was an enslaved man enslaved by William Whipple, who sued for his freedom, signed a petition with a group of other Black enslaved people in New Hampshire, and eventually successfully gained his freedom, not thanks to the generosity of William Whipple, but thanks to Prince Whipple's concerted efforts to gain his freedom because he so wanted to be free. right? And these are like super patriotic stories that one could tell, right, about aspirations for freedom in the Revolutionary era by Black Americans. But they don't tell those stories, right? Those are not stories they tell. And maybe they probably don't know this stuff because these people don't know anything about history. So, I mean, that's probably the easiest explanation for why that's not there. And they regard reading Black history as somehow, I don't know, turns you woke or something.
Un-American.
Right. But these are not hard stories to find. They're books about them, right? There's plenty of information out there if you went looking for it. An undergraduate intern could find it in 30 minutes with a Google search, right? And so by not surfacing these stories, which if we had a Democratic administration in power, those stories would be part of how the history would be remembered in the 250th, on the 250th anniversary. But I guess we don't believe in inclusion anymore, right? We don't believe in diversity either, right? And so that to me is a sign of just how implicitly, if not explicitly, white their vision of American history is, and their vision of the American future is, right? And that's pretty much the definition of white nationalism, which runs counter to the way I was socialized to think about what America was, which is that it's a multiracial democracy, right? That's what World War II supposedly was about, right? During the Reagan era, I was taught that's what makes us exceptional, right? That's what makes us special as a nation. And so to see one of our two parties kind of, walking away from that vision of what America was and should be, I would hope would be more alarming to our fellow citizens than it seems to be.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the good thing in polling lately, though, does seem to be the case that Donald Trump's numbers since he began his power grabs really have gone into the toilet. And I mean, from when you look at the data, he won in 2024 on the basis of lying to uninformed people, basically people who didn't pay attention to the news. Like the less attention you paid to the news, the more you supported Trump. And so his goal was to expand the electorate with people who didn't know very much about politics and lie to them a lot, because the people who already had paid attention, they didn't like him.
Right.
And so the people who followed the news the most, the majority of them were against Trump.
Right.
And so his only shot to win in 2024 was to lie to a bunch of people who hadn't paid attention or were too young.
Right.
And so now, and we can see that especially with his numbers with Hispanic Americans, that they have just absolutely cratered since he began, papers, please, authoritarian policy, and literally sued in the Supreme Court to say we should have the right to talk to anyone we want who looks Hispanic.
Right.
And sadly, they won that case. But that's so people have to pay attention. I mean, and that's, I think that's ultimately why the reactionary right thinks that the education is liberally biased, because when you know stuff, you don't like what they're doing. That's the long and short of it.
Yeah. And their messaging has now just been, it's just pure propaganda, most of which has no correlation with empirical reality. And so, right. So anyone whose antennas have any kind of sensor for BS can obviously pick up right on this, on the lies and distortions. And so this is where I feel like a lot of, the social media controlled by Musk and controlled by Zuckerberg and sort of other folks, are part of their goal is to basically stymie and kind of kill the parts of people's psyches that are like BS detectors, right? And sort of create an environment in which people will be willing to believe anything, right? And when you create that sort of epistemological environment, it just makes it easier for shameless liars to, create whatever vision of reality they want to create and get people to accept it, right? And buy into it. But I do believe that most people don't want to live in a world like that. Like, most people don't like getting lied to. Most people don't like being duped by people with great wealth and power.
Most people like having a house or having healthcare.
Right. Yeah. Or like not dying from an actual disease that really is dangerous to them. Like, people don't like it when their kids die from measles. And they especially don't like it if their kid gets measles and then they find out that there was a vaccine that would have probably prevented it. But someone they trusted told them that the vaccine wasn't necessary. I mean, who knows how this will play out? Or, the millions of stories of now, or I don't know, millions, but there was a story in Politico recently about some farmers in central Pennsylvania who are just shocked that, like, the mass deportations have created a situation in which the undocumented people they used to rely on to do work on their farms aren't available to do work on their farms. And now they're going to lose their farms. And it's like, well, what did you think was going to happen when the guy who ran on the platform of doing mass deportations told you he was going to do that? So, people vote for sometimes quite irrational or idiosyncratic reasons. But maybe at some point people will put two and two together, right? And recognize the kind of incoherence of it. But there's one thing though that I want to really emphasize, which is that this kind of, and I call it a liberalism. I know you call it reactionary kind of conservatism. There's a great book by Stephen Hahn called Illiberal America. It's a history of America over the last 250 years. And he makes the argument that, this thread has always been a part of our political culture, this sort of expulsionist, illiberal thing. And the thing that we sometimes don't recognize about it is that for a lot of people, they really enjoy it and it's meaningful to them. Like, so to folks who don't enjoy watching people being frog marched into a prison in El Salvador, which is, I think, the majority of us, it's hard for us to get ourselves in the mind of someone who watches a video, like a torture video like that, and gets pleasure from it, right? And I think that's the part that's a little bit harder to sit with, right? That there are people, or, when a late night host who you don't even watch gets fired due to pressure from the president, most people, like, if this happened to some like right-wing talk show host who I don't follow, and if Joe Biden had somehow like arranged with the FCC to get Greg Gutfeld fired, I would be like, that's terrible. Like, I don't like Greg Gutfeld, but like the president shouldn't be arranging for him to get fired. That's ludicrous, right?
Or at the very least, you wouldn't like it.
Right. It wouldn't be pleasure. I would be like, and I think that, but for the folks who are getting pleasure somehow from Jimmy Kimmel getting fired, that way of being in the world is really hard to like reel people back from, right? My sense is that most people just probably don't care, or they don't even know. But the people who really do take pleasure in that, I don't know what you say to that. Like, I don't know, or likewise, people who get pleasure out of the idea of sending a person who's undocumented in the US to some third country that they've never set foot in, where they're going to be locked up in a gulag possibly for the rest of their lives. Who would want that for another human being, right? Like, why would you want that? And if we, and there's the impulse to be like, well, this isn't who we are. And, it shouldn't be who we are. It's not who most of us are. But it has been who some of us are, right? And unfortunately, like, that segment has been kind of cultivated, amplified, and like corralled into this like media safe space that the Republican Party has created for those folks. And I find it to be incredibly just offensive and horrible what these people who know better are doing to their fellow citizens by lying to them so shamelessly. But it's a free country. I don't know what what there is to stop it, other than to try to kind of just pump out counter messaging that tries to be accurate and true. And like you said, putting in people's own words what it is they've said, and allowing people to make up their own minds about it.
Yeah. Well, and that's why a lot of the pushback for people criticizing the things that Charlie Kirk said.
Right.
That's why they were so against people doing that. And one of the guests on the program that we just ran an episode with, Karen Atia, she was fired by the Washington Post for quoting Charlie Kirk, and not saying anything about him otherwise, and just saying, he said these particular Black women, have no merit and stole their slots from white people, and presumably they knew that Barack Obama was going to marry a white woman or something. Like, I don't know what the hell that even means. how is she stole a spot from a white person? I don't know that, but they don't want you to know what Charlie Kirk said. They don't want you to know that Charlie Kirk demanded the execution of Joe Biden. They don't want you to know.
Right.
That's what this whole idea of fictitious republicanism is about.
Right.
And so that's why they hate real history and real scholarship, because their ideas are not grounded in reality. And and this mentality that you were just talking about here, it is so abhorrent, so shocking that a decent person doesn't want to believe that their fellow human beings actually have these viewpoints.
Right.
And so that, I think, does create a lot of reticence on the part of many, liberals. I call this pathological liberalism. That's what it is. That, you have to be able to stand up for your own values, because if you don't, then who will?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And it's a, to my mind, I've come more and more to think that the internet was a mistake. Social media. There's so much I love about it. There's so many positive things, but the way
that's how we know each other.
I know, exactly. Right. And that's right. I'm obviously mostly,
I know.
And there's not much we can do about it, but, the way that we've just created a political culture where it's just become about entertainment and about attention and anger and emotion. And so it's just 99% heat and 1% light, and that's just not what a healthy democratic political culture should look like. It should oftentimes be kind of boring, right? Like, politics is kind of boring. If you get into the weeds of it, it's really technical and detailed, right? It's like, it's not going to be able to be easily sensationalized. And it's not about like good versus evil. It's about weighing all kinds of like complicated different considerations as to where the train line is going to go through when we try to build high-speed rail between these two cities, and all the messiness that comes with the actual, like, what politics is for, right? That all just gets pushed under the rug, and it just becomes about identity, and especially relational identity, and who do you hate and who do you like, who's your friend, who's your enemy. And that style of politics is very conducive to the reactionary right. It's like, that's what they want politics to look like, because that serves their interests. And folks on the left who actually want to like use government power to make everybody's lives better, doing that doesn't involve identifying who your enemy is and owning them and crushing them. It involves like doing environmental studies to like see which chemicals are being produced by what factories are potentially harming kids. And so that approach to like governance in the public good is just not well served by a political media environment that just prioritizes hot takes and memes and rage. And the right has just really benefited from the way that our politics has become almost entirely defined by that, and by the voices who amplify that and promote that with great pleasure and glee, and with no sense at all of like, maybe we're not actually making anybody's lives better, right, by doing this. And that makes me really kind of enraged that folks are doing that, even though I just said we're not supposed to be enraged. But anyway.
Well, I think that's a good place to leave it, Seth. So for people who want to keep up with your stuff, what are your recommendations for that?
Well, I'm on Blue Sky, which is a nice short form way to say things. We're during the semester, so most of my time is devoted to teaching and grading and doing my work. But occasionally I get a chance to do some things on Blue Sky. And I also have a newsletter on which I've moved from Substack onto Ghost, which is called Rightlandia. And that's where I post stuff related to the research project that I'm working on, which is about a white nationalist anti-Semite with ties to domestic terrorists and neo-Nazis who became the chair of the Oregon Republican Party in 1978 and 1979. And so it's a kind of history of right-wing radicalization inside one state's Republican Party that runs from the 1950s into the early 2000s, sort of focusing on this one figure who almost nobody has ever heard of before, who played a really important role in kind of pushing what had once been a very moderate Republican Party in Oregon to the far right.
Yeah. Sounds like a good book. We'll look forward to having you on to talk about it when you get it ready.
Thanks.
All right. Good to have you.
Yeah.
All right. So that is the program for today. I appreciate you joining us for the conversation. And you can always get more if you go to theoryofchange.show, where we have the video, audio, and transcript of all the episodes. And we have subscription options on Patreon and on Substack. If you want to subscribe on Patreon, go to patreon.com/discoverflux. And if you're a paid subscribing member, thank you very much for your support. That means a lot. And if you can't afford to do a paid subscription right now, I understand that. But give us a written review over on iTunes or Spotify. That's very helpful. And if you're watching on YouTube, please click the like and subscribe button so you can get notified when we do another episode.